I suppose you could probably imagine from the title that if we ask the question, do they help or hurt, we probably think that on balance a lot of government policies hurt more than help. We have a very interesting lineup of speakers. We're going to try to take this from kind of the global to the more of the state and local level, policy level, to the hands-on level. And so we have a very interesting lineup that kind of takes us from that top-level view all the way down to the implementing view, to an individual who works every day with the homeless community here in the greater Austin area. One of the things that we've found at the Foundation with our research on poverty is that contrary to much of the common public opinion, poverty is actually most concentrated in the far west and in the northeast, not in the south, as is frequently assumed by most Americans. And the reason why most Americans think that poverty is concentrated in the south is because the 51-year-old measure of poverty, the official poverty measure that has been in use since the early 60s, does not take into account the cost of living. And so that poverty measure assumes that it costs the same to live in Manhattan as it does in Lubbock, Texas, which of course is patently absurd. And as a result, it leads to a very distorted view of poverty that understates the poverty on the coasts and in the Northeast and overstates the level of poverty in the Midwest and the South. A new measure of poverty has been developed by the U.S. Census Bureau called the Supplemental Measure of Poverty, which actually looks at the cost of living, but only for housing, as well as looks at additional benefits that aren't counted under the official poverty measure. Things like Section 8 housing vouchers and food stamps. Food stamps isn't considered income in the official poverty measure because it's not considered cash, even though it comes out in an electronic debit card and spends the same as cash. It's considered in kind, not cash, so it doesn't count toward the official poverty measure. Under this new measure of poverty, which has been developed over the last 20 years and has been published now for about 5 years, the state that has the highest poverty measure in the country is my former state, my former home state of California, which as a per capita share has 47% more people in poverty per capita than does Texas. 47%. And this, ladies and gentlemen, in a state that prides itself on its progressive governance, has the highest progressive tax rate, has a lot of programs in place to help the poor, and yet because of this burdensome regulatory tax and lawsuit climate, it's actually very difficult for people to earn a living in California, hence the highest poverty rate in the nation under this alternative measure. So that's among the interesting facts that I think would be useful for you to keep in the back of your minds as you listen to the upcoming presentations. We're going to hear first from our friends with the Fraser Institute. The Fraser folks are out of British Columbia, and you can, if you try really hard, you could probably understand Fred McMahon. He has a pretty strong Canadian accent, and I know we're a long way from the Canadian border here in Texas, but you should welcome him warmly because I think, Fred, you got on an airplane like at 4 in the morning to get down here?
Yeah.
And which city did you fly out of?
Toronto.
Toronto. Do they even speak English there?
Come see, come saw.
Okay, yeah, very good. So Fred is a resident fellow and the holder of the Dr. Michael Walker Research Chair in Economic Freedom, and he manages the Economic Freedom of the World Project and coordinates the Economic Freedom Network, an international alliance of independent think tanks in over 90 nations and territories. And I'm proud to say that the Texas Public Policy Foundation, we're one of those partner think tanks that works with Fraser. It's part of our international cooperation with our brothers to the north. He's the co-author of the Economic Freedom of North America Annual Report and Economic Freedom of the Arab World Annual Report. In fact, weren't you in Jordan a month or two ago?
Yeah, a few weeks ago.
So, ana batakallamu Arabi?
No.
No?
Jordan,
Okay.
Jordan and Morocco.
All right, very good. Did you presumably had to eat with your hands in Morocco?
I still get forks, I'm afraid.
You still get forks, okay, very good. He's written numerous publications and has worked on economic freedom projects in over 30 nations. One of the things I think that you'll appreciate most about Fred is the research that they've done for decades now shows a conclusive link between more economic freedom and more prosperity across the spectrum. In other words, it doesn't just help the well-off, it helps everybody. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, Fred McMahon of the Fraser Institute.
Thanks very much, Chuck. You're quite right. In the Arab world, you should eat with your hands, but I'm afraid that I'm culturally limited and still use knives and forks. Just let me say what an impressive organization and group this is. I wish every state and every province had something. I'd like to start by, when I want to go slides, I'll just do that, okay? I'd like to thank Chuck and Olivia, though it does make you wonder about the sanity of us policy folks that we thank people who force us to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning to fly most of the day. But as I say, this is a marvelous event, and I'm very pleased to be here. What I'll be talking about today is I'm going to give you, we produce the economic freedom indexes, and I'm going to give you an overview of what they are, look at the international evidence which is relevant within nations too, and then examine what we know about the effects of economic freedom on poverty in the United States. Well, what is economic freedom? Economic freedom, individuals have economic freedom when the property they acquire without the use of force, fraud, or theft is protected from physical invasions from physical invasions by others, and they are free to use, exchange, or give their property so long as their actions do not violate the identical rights of others. What all those words boil down to is it means that individuals and families have the ability to make their own economic decisions. For the World Index, which as Chuck mentioned is a project that I manage, we look at 5 areas: size of government and taxation. If government taxes away too much of your property, it reduces economic freedom. If it spends too much, even if it gets the money from sources other than taxes, it reduces the space for free exchange and thus limits economic freedom. Private property and the rule of law, the absolute infrastructure of economic freedom. Less a concern here and in Canada, where the rule of law is like the wallpaper, but it's a lack of the rule of law that allows crony capitalism to grow up instead of true markets in places that have tried to take reforms. Sound money, government can expropriate your property through inflation every bit as easily as they can through taxation. Sound trade regulations and tariffs. You should be able to buy and sell from anybody in Texas and from anybody in the world, and regulation of business, labor, and capital markets. For the North American index, we managed to get variables for each of the U.S. states and Canadian state U.S. states and Mexican states and Canadian provinces in the areas of size of government, takings and discriminatory taxation, and regulation of the labor market. The other variables we use on a national basis from the World Report. So, for instance, every state in the United States gets the average rule of law score for the United States. Every province in Canada gets the average rule of law score for the Canadian province. What this does, however, and there's been immense research based on it, is it provides a map to free market reform for the states, and it provides a scorecard. Talk about making a difference. We have, in the United States, and Chuck has been perhaps the key leader in this, we've now developed an economic freedom network amongst the U.S. states. I think we now have 20-odd state members, and Chuck and the Texas Policy Foundation were some of the first aboard. But we have members in over 90 nations and territories around the world, including places that don't much like each other: Venezuela and Colombia, Russia and Ukraine, Israel, and this will surprise you, the Gaza Strip. These countries or places, territories, may not much like each other, but the people we work with are dedicated to improving the lives of their citizens by creating freer markets. Well, now that you've had a chance to read that, We have a number of translations, subnational and regional indexes. This is the Economic Freedom of the World Report itself, the Economic Freedom of North America, Economic Freedom of the Arab World. We're very proud of this. As everybody knows, the Arab world is having immense difficulties in spreading those difficulties to the rest of us. Our job is to keep the ideas of liberal markets, of liberalism and tolerance generally, alive in the Arab world, at least through this horrid period. We have a number of translations. This was the Mexican translation. This was the Central American translation. This is the Slovenian translation. Why is economic freedom important? Well, let me give you a global sense. Things that may be less important here and in Canada, but are so important globally. Well, the first thing, and this is important in Canada and the United States, is that economic freedom, free markets, beat government plannings hands down every day of the week in reducing poverty and creating prosperity. But it transforms a society. Without economic freedom, if government controls the economy or crony capitalists control the economy, winning and being in power is everything. It means whether you can get a job, whether you can get a promotion, whether you can feed and clothe your family, whether you can get subsidies to keep your family going. Being part of the right group, the group in power, means all of this. And that sets group against group in a desperate struggle for power and rewards and the benefits of corruption. And you get ahead in a society like that by making other people worse off, by creating monopolies, by restricting choices. Now, with economic freedom, true freedom, not crony capitalism, you need to make the best products and services. You need to be efficient and productive. That means you have to hire the best people. So instead of setting groups in silos where they have to fight each other for privilege, people from different groups become your employees, your employers, your suppliers, your customers. It starts cutting across racial, tribal, and ethnic lines. And you get ahead by making people better off, by producing goods and services that they willingly want to buy. And in a free exchange, both parties have to gain, or the party that doesn't gain won't make the free exchange. Imagine that. The change in dynamics of a society where you get ahead by making people worse off to a society where you get ahead by making people better off. The world average over time, even during the recession, has continually gone up as politicians and the public begin to learn the benefits of economic freedom. Impact on prosperity and development. The column to your far left represents the quarter most free countries, to the far right the least free. And you can see that the average per capita income in the freest countries is about $40,000 US a year in purchasing power adjusted US dollars, and only about $6,000 a year in the least free. Now, our friends on the left will tell us that free markets are awful and that they desperately increase inequality, and that all the benefits of economic freedom and markets and the increased prosperity go to the rich. Well, this is the income share of the poorest 10%. And an economist would look at that and call it a random walk. You don't see much there. The evidence seems to suggest, including in the United States, that increased levels of economic freedom does not reduce, but does not increase inequality. But here is the miracle. Because economic freedom produces so much more prosperity, the poorest 10% in the most free countries have an average per capita income of about $9,000 a year. In the least free countries, about $1,000 a year. So while economic freedom may not have much impact on inequality, but don't believe those that tell you it increases inequality, it has a dramatic impact on reducing poverty, and that's true in Canada and the United States as it is around the globe. And here's another way that it reduces poverty. Because in an economically free society, you're judged on your own merits, your own abilities, rather than which group you belong to, it increases educational achievement. And equally importantly, it reduces the gap between men and women, boys and girls. And this, too, is a great tool in reducing poverty, increased educational outcomes. Again, because of the changes in dynamics, it also increases political rights. This is by Freedom House. This really represents democracy. If the government or crony capitalists control your ability to get a job, feed and clothe your family, they have plenty of tools to suppress dissent just through economic punishment until the anger boils over. But if you're economically free, they can't take away your ability to make a living. You can express your opinions. Same thing with civil rights, again related back to the dynamics I mentioned. Corruption, and this is true even in the States and Canada. Lack of economic freedom is the raw material of corruption. If there are massive regulations, it means there's somebody who's making a discretionary decision. It means there's someone who you need to ask somebody's permission to do something. If you're economically free and you don't need to ask anybody's permission, there's no one to pay off. Life satisfaction. Our friends on the left a while ago started to give up on socialism and prosperity, recognizing that a century's worth of evidence showed that free markets produce more prosperity. So then they turned to, well, it's not prosperity that matters, it's happiness, it's life satisfaction. And who could be happy in a free market dog-eat-dog world? Well, the research now shows that economic freedom is an independent driver of happiness. Despite what our friends on the left think, people actually like to make their own decisions. Who knew? They like to have control of their lives. And this is good. You can see the least free quartile. That's about how old I am now. So I'm awfully glad that I'm living in the most free quartile. Economic freedom in North America, as you can see, Texas is pretty much at the top. Last year, I think it was #1. This year, it's #3. But the variation between the top states is small enough that don't consider that a reversal. But hey, this is the Texas Policy Foundation. Don't let it go any further. Unfortunately, there's a sad story about economic freedom in North America. That's the average level of economic freedom in the Canadian provinces, some decline. Now look at what's happened to the United States. You used to be way, way ahead of us, and now you're moving up to the cold, dark north. Mexico actually has a similar pattern as the United States. And by the way, to make this nonpartisan, this decline started under the Republican administration of George Bush. It has continued under the Democratic administration of Barack Obama. These are the things we know about economic freedom, both globally and in the United States. It creates whoops. Sorry, I've got to keep my hands under control. They're watching me up there. Creates prosperity, boosts economic growth, reduces poverty. As I said, does not increase inequality, but may not reduce it. Enhances job growth, encourages entrepreneurship, and increases in-migration, which Donald Trump may not be too enthusiastic about. Over 100 peer-review articles have been written on economic freedom, and these are all well established in the literature. This is not somebody looking at a map and making a guess. These are well-controlled empirical studies. I like this one from Van Skyn of the Texas Policy Foundation. It looks at how Texas does in the economic freedom of North America. As I mentioned last year, Texas was first. And you see how the results line up with what I had said earlier. Now, this itself is not hard research, but it's illustrative of the hard research. Here's the hard research. This will start on inequality. The studies basically find no relationship between economic freedom and inequality except for the Bennett and Vader regional analysis, which suggests a U-shaped thing. So as you move towards economic freedom, inequality increases, and then as you get there and everybody starts sharing the poverty, inequality declines. Davis and Harrington and Tague note that inequality is lower in economically free states than in non-economically free states, but the difference is not large enough to be statistically significant. And what the bottom one suggests is you get a leftist urge when there's inequality. They introduce policies from the left, greater government control, and that in turn increases inequality. Well, I have just run out of time. There are about 20 slides left, but I believe in obeying the timekeeper. I'll just take a look at the next slide, see if it has anything interesting. Yeah, it does. It just says that economic freedom increases job growth, and a job is the best social program of all. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sure during Q&A there'll be some potential questions thrown your way. We're next going to hear from our colleague, Randal O'Toole at the Cato Institute. He's a senior fellow there. He has expertise in both land use and in transportation. And now we're starting to get into the nitty-gritty about how government policies interact with the people and affect prosperity and end up squashing, in many cases, squashing the poor. He has written numerous papers and 5 books critiquing government policy and planning, including Gridlock, Why We're All Stuck in Traffic and What to Do About It. O'Toole is an author of numerous Cato papers. He's also written for Regulation magazine, as well as op-eds and articles for numerous other national journals and newspapers. Regulation magazine, you know, that sounds like a real gripping publication. That, I should spend some time with that. O'Toole travels extensively and has spoken about free market environmental issues in dozens of cities. And before working for Cato, he taught environmental economics at Yale, UC Berkeley, and Utah State University. Ladies and gentlemen, Randal O'Toole.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Supposedly this works now, which is, oh, I got something changing here. There we go. Now, although I work for Cato, I live in Oregon. And one of my areas of expertise is public lands, like the Bureau of Land Management and Fish and Wildlife Service. So I've had an interesting couple of days lately. Be glad to talk with you about that issue sometime. I also work on transportation and housing, and I was asked to speak about housing issues on Friday. So if you want to hear what government can do for low-income people regarding housing, come to the Friday session. Today, since I also work on transportation, I'm going to talk about transportation. Having a job, as was previously mentioned, is an important part of getting out of poverty. And a lot of people think, well, the way to help low-income people to get a job is to give them a free transit pass. And numerous studies have shown that transit doesn't work for low-income people anymore. It probably never really did very well. Outside of New York, transit doesn't work for anybody anymore, except for the contractors and union workers who build it and work for transit. So that's not really the way to help people get out of poverty. Instead, it's been found that the most effective way to help somebody out of poverty is to give them a car or to loan them money for an old beater car. And there's a program called Wheels to Work in which different states have funds that they use as a cycling fund where they loan up to $4,000 for somebody to buy a car or to repair an old car and get it working. And it's been discovered that if you have a car, you're more likely to be able to get a job, get a higher paying job, and keep that job than if you don't have a car. And having a car is more important than having a high school diploma. So transportation is really important to low-income people. But once you've got a car, what happens? You're stuck in traffic, especially here in Austin, also in other large cities in Texas. Traffic congestion is a huge problem. And the great thing about it is when you solve traffic congestion, you not only help low-income people, you help everybody else. But low-income people find traffic congestion a bigger barrier than other people. If you have a middle-class job, you can work at home some days a week. You can have flex time. You probably don't have to come in at rush hour. But if you have a working-class job, it's much more likely that you have fixed hours and that you have to drive in at rush hour, and congestion is a big barrier to you. The cost of congestion is huge. Nationwide, it's over $150 billion a year. In Texas alone, it's well over $12 billion a year, according to the Texas Transportation Institute. Now, what do we do about congestion? It turns out there's a very simple answer that we absolutely know works. It's the same answer that's used by hotels, by airlines, by movie theaters, by everybody who has to deal with fluctuating demand for their product. And what is that answer? That answer is pricing. You charge more during congested periods of the day and less during less congested periods of the day. We know it works. We know it can absolutely solve the congestion problem. And it's especially important for highways, because highways are the only good that I know where the supply declines when the demand increases. Now, can you think about that? When airlines get a lot of demand at Thanksgiving, the number of seats on an airliner does not decrease. When winter hits and people want to go to Florida for hotels, the number of hotel rooms in the hotels doesn't decrease. But when you're on a highway and it's going 60 miles an hour, you can move 2,000 vehicles an hour down that highway lane, a single lane. When the speed's slow to 30 miles an hour because of congestion, you can only move 1,000 vehicles an hour down the lane. So by preventing congestion, we can effectively double the capacity of our roads during rush hour. This will have a huge effect on our productivity, because numerous studies have shown that getting people to work faster will give them access to more jobs and will increase worker productivity. Well, this just shows average speeds. You notice the average speeds as it gets a little, as traffic flows increase, average speeds decline a little bit, but there's a maximum point, and when traffic flows increase further, then the capacity or the throughput on the road dramatically declines beyond about 2,000 vehicles an hour. And it's different for different roads. Some roads might be 2,400 vehicles an hour, other roads a little less. So what we see is there might be only 5 minutes of the day when demand exceeds 2,000 vehicles an hour on a particular lane. But because of that 5 minutes, you might have hours of congestion, because once it exceeds that level, you then have capacity or throughput declining to 1,000 vehicles an hour, and it might take hours before actual demand falls below that. So you end up with bumper-to-bumper traffic for hours a day. So by congestion pricing and just dealing with those few minutes of the day when traffic exceeds the demand level, you can double the capacity of your roads during the entire rush hour period. Now, the reason why we don't do this is because tolling is expensive. When you have somebody out there at a toll booth, half or more of the money collected goes to pay the toll taker. But today, we have electronic tolling. That's a lot cheaper. It's not quite as cheap as collecting money from oil refineries, but it's still a lot cheaper, and maybe 5 to 10% of the money collected ends up going for the toll taking, and the rest of it can go for highways and roads and transportation. Now, the problem with tolling is there's a lot of opposition to it. It's politically a minefield. And so what do we do instead? If we can't do the right thing, we do something stupid. We build light rail lines. We build commuter rail lines. We build streetcar lines. We talk about high-speed rail lines. Now, the reality is, they may tell you these lines are successful, but they're not. They're all dismal failures. Every rail transit line in Texas, Dallas, Houston, Austin, they're dismal failures. And you can tell how much of a failure they are by this fact. On most of these lines, it would be cheaper to give every single daily round-trip commuter a new Toyota Prius, not once, but every other year for as long as you would have planned to run that rail line, than it is to keep running that rail line. The rail lines are just expensive and nobody rides them. Almost nobody rides them. There's also proposals for high-speed rail. Again, it's going to be expensive, a lot more expensive than they always tell you, and it's not going to do much to get people off the road. To really have successful transportation, transportation needs to have SEX, not SEX, but SECS, which is speed, economy, convenience, and safety. Without speed, economy, convenience, and safety, transportation is not going to be successful. It's going to be a big waste of money. So we think of high-speed rail as being fast, but in fact, it's a lot slower than flying. The Amtrak Acela averages 90 miles an hour. Some of the fastest trains in the world average 140 miles an hour. Flying from here to Dallas, 225 miles an hour. Flying from here to Seattle or to New York, 350 miles an hour. There's no way high-speed rail can compete with that. It's also much, much more costly. The neat thing about flying is you have to pay for the airplanes and the airports, and there's no infrastructure in between. Rails require huge amounts of infrastructure, and so the costs are extremely high. Airfares are about 15 cents a passenger mile. Amtrak's Acela is 75 cents a passenger mile and requires huge subsidies to keep it going. Airlines get almost no subsidies. How about urban transit? The same thing is true. It's a lot slower than driving. Commuter rail is the fastest urban transit, average of about 32 miles an hour, but most urban transit is about 10 to 15 miles an hour. The average speed varies by city, but in relatively uncongested cities like El Paso and Kansas City, average street and highway speeds, average urban speeds by car is about 40 miles an hour. That's a target to shoot for. That's much faster than you'll ever be able to get transit going. Transit is also a lot more expensive than driving. Driving is about 25 cents a passenger mile, including all highway subsidies. Transit is 2 to 4 times that much. Some light rail lines are more than 10 times that expensive. So transit is very expensive. And when we talk about people getting out of their cars and on a transit, we're talking about getting them out of cheap transportation and into expensive transportation, and that's not good for low-income people. Transit tends to be more dangerous, especially light rail and commuter rail are particularly dangerous, not necessarily to the occupants until they get off and get hit by the train as it's leaving the station. We do have, never saw that before. We do have a new kind of transportation that to me has sex. It's on the horizon. It's faster, it's going to be more economical, it's going to be more convenient, it's going to be safer, and that is self-driving cars. This is the Google car. I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. There's experiments with it in California and here in Austin. It's going to have enormous benefits. It's going to essentially triple roadway capacities. It's going to lead to universal mobility. You can be 9 years old. I'll be able to put my dogs in the car and send them to the vet. Faster speeds because there'll be a lot less congestion. It'll be safer, and it'll be greener because with faster speeds, there'll be less congestion. There'll be less wasting time in traffic and fuel. This is a valet parking car. You'll be able to buy this in a couple of years. You get out of your car at work or at a hotel or at a restaurant, and you say, car, go park yourself. It'll drive around. It's got an inventory of parking places in its computer base. It'll drive around until it finds a vacant one, and then it parks itself. Or you might want to rent your car out through Uber or something like that if you'd rather do that. It doesn't have to park itself at all. Or you might send it home and have it pick up your kids and take them to school. All of these things are not that far away. 10 years at the most, probably 5 years, to be able to buy a car that can drive itself on most roads without any problem at all. Today you can buy cars. Here's a Ford Fusion. You can buy Subarus. You can buy other mid-level cars that can take a lot of the driving off your hands. Personally, I hate driving, but recently I had a conference here in Austin in November. I decided to drive here from Oregon, and it was a joy because I have adaptive cruise control and some of these other self-driving benefits. Google is talking about building cars that won't even have steering wheels. That'll probably be in about 10 to 15 years in the future, but the car will be completely controlled by itself. Now, the point is, you don't need a lot of new infrastructure. This uses existing infrastructure. It will be available to everybody through car sharing. It won't be that. It'll be a lot less expensive than transit, so we can help low-income people at a much lower cost. What does Texas need to do to get ready for that? Basically, so just keep up the basics. Traffic signal coordination. It's the most cost-effective thing you can do, short next tolling, to reduce congestion. There's only 2 cities in America that have coordinated all their traffic signals, and neither of them are in Texas. You need to keep the road stripes. You need to fill the potholes. The self-driving cars are going to need those road stripes, so you need to keep them painted. You need to fill the potholes for everybody's benefit. Texas has some unusual institutions. You have county toll road authorities. Only Florida is the only other state that has that. And you have the regional mobility authorities. I think Texas is almost unique in having that. These have been very effective at helping to relieve congestion, but given my preference, I prefer the toll road authority over the regional mobility authority because I think the mobility authorities, with their ability to draw upon tax dollars as well as tolls, are going to be more likely to build urban monuments instead of roads that you really need. Gas taxes are on their way out. It's time to think about mileage-based user fees rather than gas taxes. My home state of Oregon was the first state to have a gas tax, and it's now the first state experimenting with mileage-based user fees. They started an experiment this July. I was one of the first people to volunteer. They sent me this little device, which I plugged into my car, and now I pay by the mile rather than by the gallon that I use. I actually pay a little more because I've got a pretty fuel-efficient car. But what it means is, in the long run, when I drive on a county road, the money I pay will go to the county. When I drive on a city road, the street, the money I pay will go to the city. When I drive on a private road or a Forest Service road, the money will go to the private road owner or the Forest Service or whoever. And that doesn't happen with gas taxes today. So, to help poor people, you need to relieve congestion. You need to make automobility more accessible. You need to prepare for the next transportation innovation, which is self-driving cars. I talk about all of these issues in my book, Gridlock. I just happen to bring a couple copies with me in case anybody really wants one. It's a $25 book. I'm selling them for $15 if you have any interest in them. If you want to go to Cato.org, what did I do? Cato.org, you can download some papers I've written. I've written more than 24 papers that are on Cato's website that are available for free download. A lot of them are about traffic congestion and transportation. So I hope you'll find those worthwhile. Thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're next going to hear from someone who's a practitioner. We've heard from 2 individuals who do a lot of research and study, develop documents that recommend policy changes. Now we're going to hear from someone who every day works with the less fortunate here in Central Texas, and who, because of his hands-on experience, has seen firsthand what happens when government steps in and enacts rules and regulations and ordinances that actually make things worse. And so he is not at all a theorist, but is a hands-on practitioner. His name is Alan Graham. He's the president and founder of Mobile Loaves and Fishes, a social profit enterprise that delivers meals to the homeless and working poor people. With more than 16,000 volunteers, Mobile Loaves and Fishes is the largest prepared feeding program to the homeless, and many describe MLF volunteers, their experiences as life-changing, as one would imagine if you volunteer for something like that and work with individuals who need the assistance. Prior to founding Mobile Loaves and Fishes, Alan was a successful real estate investor and developer. He founded Trilogy Development and the Lennox's Group, which developed Austin's airport cargo facility and other airports around the country. He attended the College of Mainland and later University of Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that after Alan's presentation, we're going to have a little over 11 minutes of Q&A, and I'm hoping that at that point we can kind of bring together what on the surface looks like very different discussions, because it's really all connected by a common theme. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Graham.
This actually won't take me very long, and the slide deck is inside your brain, so take notes and just remember what I say. You know, I'd like to tell you about 13 years ago, I started something here in Austin called a street retreat, and that's where you get dropped off on the streets, group of people. I'm actually doing one tomorrow for 48 hours, but the original one was 72 hours. And a group of myself and about 14 friends were dropped off into Woolridge Park, which is just a few blocks from here. And right away, we met a group of homeless friends, and one of them, a man named JP, who is still a good friend of mine, and actually lives in a community that we have developed 7.5 miles east of where we are standing right now, invited me and my then 15-year-old son and another friend of mine that was on the retreat if we wanted to go dumpster diving with him. And I can tell you that my immediate internal response was not only no, but hell no. And, but my 15-year-old beat me to the punch, and he said, yes, absolutely. So at 10 o'clock at night, we walked across downtown into East Austin and picked up a buggy, which was a HEB grocery cart. It turns out that the HEB grocery carts, if you are a street scavenger, are the best buggies out there. And we began to proceed and move this buggy from East Austin through downtown and through the university area, jumping in and out of dumpsters and harvesting recyclables. That would be primarily aluminum cans that people had thrown away, but if we were fortunate enough to encounter a construction dumpster at a construction site, there may be other high-value products like aluminum blinds and stuff like that. It turns out that the legislative session was in session at that time, and one of the recyclables at that point in time were the paper that all the bills were printed on and then quickly discarded in order to print new bills. So by the time the evening was over with, we had about 600 to 700 pounds inside of this buggy, and we get pulled over at one of the dumpsters by the Austin Police Department, and all four of us were issued a ticket for dumpster diving, basically, which I thought was incredible. Now I got to tell you, I've got the resources and connections to have gotten rid of those tickets, but my buddy JP on a normal day doesn't have those resources. So he is then funneled into the criminal justice system, ends up accumulating tickets, warrants are issued for his arrest, he has no money, he can't pay for those, and he ends up working the time for those tickets in jail because they're not going to do a community service. I find that to be an incredible impediment to the poorest people in our community to go out and make a living. So we begin to brainstorm within Mobile Loaves and Fishes. How can we be impactful to this population? And there's some things that I learned about this population that I think are very important. Number one, the population of the men and women that you see standing on our street corners today panhandling are for the most part not W-2 employable, and they never will be. We're not going to train them. We're not going to retrain them. They got things going on in their lives that are extraordinary impediments to them being a good W-2 employee. But what they are entrepreneurs. That's what I've learned. And by spending time with them on the streets, I began to learn very profoundly that in a lot of ways they were a lot like me. I was not very good in high school. I dropped out of the University of Texas. And the reason is that I'm extraordinarily ADD. It was very difficult for me to sit in a classroom and spend any time. And when, in 1978, I became a real estate entrepreneur, that's when I learned how to pronounce and spell that word, my world opened up. But what's happened in our economy since 1978 is that we are slowly regulating and outlawing entrepreneurs at the lowest possible level. The most egregious example that I always like to cite is that in Austin, Texas, as well as 80% of our other urban centers throughout the United States, that includes Houston, it is now against the law to have a lemonade stand on the street corner. Now, I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody dying or getting E. coli or even diarrhea from buying lemonade from a couple of little kids on the street corner. By the way, who sold lemonade when they were a kid on a street corner? Raise your hands real high. Yeah, well, we can't do that anymore. So we are no longer in a position of being able to teach our children how to do these things. But I also got to tell you that it turns out that the only entrepreneurial venue that's left to the poorest people on the planet now that's legal is something called panhandling, because that happens to be a First Amendment free speech right. So when you see the people that are standing out there on the street corners, instead of being infuriated by what they're doing, because I'm going to tell you it's quite difficult to be standing out there all day on a day like this, which is cold, wet, subject yourself to a traffic situation. They're actually living the only remaining entrepreneurial capability that's available to them. So Mobile Loaves and Fishes started to begin to create some micro enterprise businesses where we would become the blockers and tacklers to the regulatory environment that is impeding their ability to get out there and earn a dignified income. One of those is a mobile vending operation called Street Treats that we launched about 4 years ago at South by Southwest with a big fanfare in front of the state capitol. And quickly, and these are on tricycles and quadcycles, very expensive, mobile vending, custom-made equipment, beautiful stainless steel, logoed, everything just right. But immediately, code enforcement from the city of Austin got engaged and attempted to stop us because the men and women that were riding on these tricycles and quadcycles did not have a Texas Department of Public Safety issued driver's license. You had to have a damn driver's license to ride a bicycle on the streets of Austin, Texas. It's incredible. I really learned today, thank you, Chuck, that these are called occupational licensing rules, so I'll go look that up. I'm probably the least policy-minded person on this panel, but I'm going to spend some time studying this. We've actually engaged an intern at Mobile Loaves and Fishes to come to understand what are these policies that exist, not only in the city of Austin, but also statewide, that are inhibiting people at the poorest level from doing the kind of things that you and I would actually prefer them doing. So instead of panhandling downtown when you walk outside, wouldn't it be great to have somebody that just bought a box of blow pops from Sam's Club and they were selling those things for $1? By the way, the street treat cart operation, the average net profit for an entrepreneurial vendor is in excess of $20 an hour. Just throwing that out there. Yeah, unbelievable. Clap, please. And then I just learned, and Chuck DeVore has written a piece on it. There's a little article, blog post that he wrote that just a few months ago, the city of Austin passed an ordinance called a hauler, H-A-U-L-E-R, for hire license. So if you and I had an old ratty pickup truck and one of us wanted to hire us to come to our home to pick up our old refrigerator or some tree limbs that we've been chopping down, that we now had to be licensed to do that. And the fee for that license is $100. I got to tell you, you and I can look at $100 as being insignificant, but it's not. It is a tremendous amount of money when you live in poverty. So we're trying to create, and so what we plan on doing is trying to understand in Austin, Texas, what are these occupational license limitations out there. And we are going to work with the city council in order to overcome some of these things so that we can get the poorest people in our community back to work. Now, we're well known for this food truck operation, but I tell you, we're gaining worldwide notice for a new movement that we're creating here in Austin, Texas called Community First. It is a 27-acre master plan community here in Austin, Texas, that is the most incredible thing that is happening in the United States of America in terms of housing for the poorest of our poor, and frankly, is a model based upon a community model, a relational model, as opposed to a transactional model. That piece of property is literally 7.5 miles as the crow flies east of where we are right now. But if I went and walked 5 blocks from here to get on the number 37 bus line and travel across town and then transfer to the 237, it would take me 2.5 hours to get out to our property that is 7.5 miles away from here. I find that to be crazy. Now, this piece of property happens to share a property line boundary with the city of Austin. We're in Travis County, and across the fence is the city of Austin. We have land use policies in this city that are extraordinary impediments to creating the kind of housing that we need that's available to people from every economic structure. We attempted time after time after time to create a movement that not only is this city raising the flag to the flagpole at its highest level, but we're now inundated from people across the United States and internationally as well. We couldn't get this accomplished because of discretionary land use power here in the city of Austin that turns out to be an extraordinary impediment. We use land use in order to, the not in my backyard people use discretionary land use in order to discriminate against people for all kinds of reasons, but primarily economic reasons. I will tell you that in the city of Austin, I don't know about Houston or Dallas or San Antonio or Vancouver, our neighborhoods have way too much power on the local level. And somehow we've got to be, again, to address this land use issue in our communities. And I think the land use issue, particularly when it comes to density, will have an important impact on transportation and our ability to move around our cities in the future. And then there's the criminal justice system. I'm not going to spend any time talking about this, but I can tell you that people that live in poverty and people at the lowest level of poverty, particularly those that find themselves chronically homeless, and all you have to do is walk literally 2 blocks from where we're standing right now to the epicenter of homelessness in Austin, Texas at 7th Street and Natchez. And and these folks are being ticketed every single day. And then these become they're being ticketed for criminal trespass, for public intoxication, for no sitting, violation of no sitting, no lying, no sleeping ordinances that are in our community. And then they become employable because you and I, as business owners, can no longer handle the liability of being able to hire them. Anyway, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Well, I hope we've had some food for thought from these three speakers. And at this point, what I'd like to do is for the, let me see, I think we've got about 16 minutes of Q&A that we can indulge ourselves in. And so what I'd like to do is just ask one favor, that if you have a question, please ask the question and don't give a speech, because sometimes that happens. So let's, who's going to have the first question?
Where's the gentleman?
There we go, right there. Yes, sir.
Years ago, I was in a job where I was looking at accident statistics and transportation statistics, et cetera. And some of the things you showed verified those, but there was a very surprising one there to me, that the public transit has a worse accident statistic. Now, I assume that is per something, per passenger mile.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes, light rail and commuter rail, which often crosses streets, are both extraordinarily dangerous. They have encounters with cars, they have encounters with pedestrians, and they happen very frequently. Buses are pretty safe. Buses are as safe as a freeway, but light rail and commuter rail are pretty dangerous. Heavy rail, which means it's entirely grade separated, is safe, but there's no heavy rail in Texas.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. I didn't see a number on the accident statistics per passenger mile of airliners. And what I remember, it was enormously safer than freeways or other transportation.
They are safer. In fact, recently we had a couple-year period when we had no fatal accidents from commercial airlines in the United States. They are very safe. High-speed rail tends to be pretty safe, but after a while, you end up having to maintain that infrastructure, and you fall behind in maintenance, and you get problems, which is the problem that Amtrak had recently. So rail can be dangerous. Highways can be dangerous, but highway safety is dramatically improved per passenger mile. Accidents or per vehicle mile accidents have declined a tremendous amount in recent years. A lot of it more decline could happen if we relieve some congestion, and of course the self-driving cars will probably eliminate 90% of the accidents that we have.
All right, we have a question just behind that gentleman, staying with the middle of the room.
To Mr. McMahon, to our Canadian brethren here, when you were comparing the income statistics, were you including, I'll call it public aid, so it's a term everybody recognizes, but government income transfers? Because certainly in the more affluent world, there are far more income transfers, and where in the poor areas there aren't. Would those numbers jack up the standard of living of people at the lower end, or were they already included?
Those are international numbers, and they would not include government transfers. They would just include the income of the people, the self.
Is it pre-tax income?
I believe so. Yes, I believe so.
Good question.
Yeah.
However, he said to me it's pre-tax income, so after you take out the taxes, it might account for those transfers.
All right, let's, any other questions? Yes, over here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Graham, interesting presentation. It's a bit of an eye-opener. One question, you mentioned that some of the individuals that you've encountered are, quote, not W-2 employable. Maybe you could give some examples of what is it that's putting people in that kind of a position?
I think there are a number of issues that put people into that deal. I think the bigger box that they're in is that they're just, there are those of us that are capable of holding an 8-hour-a-day, 40-hour-a-week, conventional type job where I go in at 8 o'clock in the morning, I clock out at noon for my lunch hour, and then back in, and then out at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If I had to do something like that, it just wouldn't work. I couldn't be held inside of a box, particularly like that. And so at the core of the entrepreneurial level, I'll spend 1 million hours a week working, but I don't want anybody telling me exactly when that time frame is. And I find the population of people that we see on the streets are like that. But if you pile on top of that behavioral health issues that a lot of our friends on the streets have, addiction issues that are out there, and then there's a physical health issue that's typically associated with people that live in extreme poverty, no teeth, physical ailments. It just makes it very difficult for them, first of all, to get hired and then to have the stability of that type of employment. But they'll get out and work several hours dumpster diving, like my friend JP, who is physically and mentally a train wreck of a human being, but will recycle. He's got a run called the Snake by the University of Texas, which snakes through the fraternity area on the Sundays after the big parties, and he's got a good relationship with those guys, and he ends up with 30, 40, 50 bucks worth of Keystone Light beer cans. That's what the university. So he's willing to work, but look, if he doesn't feel good today, he's not going to go and work.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions? Yes, over here at the exact opposite end.
Thanks. I'm not supposed to let it go. Mr. Graham, I was lucky enough, my coworkers volunteered with your property out east, and I went out of obligation, and it was hugely rewarding. I'm so glad I went. Would you expand on what that is, the tiny houses and whatnot for everybody else here? It was a very cool place.
There's a saying that we have within Mobile Loaves and Fishes that housing will never solve homelessness, but community will. We believe very profoundly that the single greatest cause to homelessness, almost uniquely in this country, but Western countries particularly, is a profound, catastrophic loss of family. The systemic issues that exacerbate homelessness, like addictions and mental health issues and employment and living wages and affordable housing, those already exist in every single one of our families that are in here. So to structurally take a homeless person off the streets and transactionally stick them into an apartment complex somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that they are no longer homeless. So the concept of Community First that has been unfolding for 11 years is one of the value of community coming up underneath our population. In some of the social teachings out of Christianity, there's some concepts. One is called subsidiarity. Another one is, it's not popping it. But what it says is that when it comes to human issues, that these issues are most successful if they're solved at the lowest possible social level. And so in homelessness, the lowest social level, provided there's competence at that level, would be the family unit. And then up from the family unit would be the village or the community. And then up from that would be city, state, and then federal government. It is completely unrealistic for us to lean on Washington, D.C. to solve a problem that exists here in Austin, Texas. And so this model out here is really that model of subsidiarity where and 100% of the money that's gone in, it's a $14.5 million development, was all raised 100% privately, no government funding whatsoever, and no meddling by the government, none of the regulations that prohibit somebody with a felony conviction from getting into housing, which normally happens if we have government HUD-funded regulated housing. I would love to, anybody that wants to, you can give me your card and we'll arrange a tour. It's an awesome place.
More questions? Yes, back here, thank you.
You're going to hold it? Okay. Can you come up a little bit? I'm tall. Mr. O'Toole, I was very interested in your ideas about reducing congestion and wondered if you could clarify a couple of them. I'm not familiar with how the self-directed cars reduce congestion, unless maybe there'd be less wrecks. And the second one, you were talking about toll booths and having less cars on the road at certain times. And I'm a little familiar with, like staggered work hours and things like that, but I don't quite know how the toll booth would work when we do have work hours, and just a little bit more on that. I didn't quite understand how we could have these different hours. Thank you.
All right, well, self-driving cars relieve congestion in two ways. First of all, about half of all congestion is what's called incident-related congestion, an accident or something that slows down the traffic. And oftentimes you'll drive down a road and suddenly you're in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and then after a few minutes it goes away and you're free-flowing traffic again, and you don't see an accident, you don't see what happened. It might be that somebody just slammed on their brakes for a minute and it caused a pulse to go in the entire flow of traffic for a while, and these pulses tend to move up the freeways over time, even though there's no obvious cause. So self-driving cars, by being more, having faster reflexes and so on, will be able to eliminate that incident-related congestion. The other half of congestion is simply too many cars trying to fit on the road at a time. And normally, you typically say you try to leave, if you're driving at 60 miles an hour, leave 6 car lengths in front of you. Well, self-driving cars having faster reflexes will be able to drive with 3 car lengths, 2 car lengths, maybe only 1 car length in front of them. So they'll be able to dramatically increase the capacities of the road right there. Now, the tolling works this way. If a road can handle 2,000 vehicles an hour on a lane, per lane, and you get 2,100 vehicles trying to fit down that lane, traffic slows way down, and so then the road can only handle 1,000 vehicles an hour. So it might be hours before the usage gets below 1,000 vehicles an hour. But if you can keep that lane from getting 2,100 vehicles an hour for a few minutes, then you never have to drop your capacity. Now here's the key. About 2/3 of all the vehicles on the road at rush hour are not people driving to work. They might be delivery vehicles, they might be people taking their kids to school, but they might be people who have a lot of flexibility in their time. And so they can change their time. And so if you start charging a little more toll during the busiest time, they might say, well, I'm going to leave 10 minutes earlier or a half hour earlier so I don't have to pay that higher fee. And if we get rid of gas taxes and pay for roads with a mileage-based user fee, which means you're paying a penny a mile anyway, and you pay a penny and a half or 2 cents when you go during rush hour, well, a few more people are going to say, I'm just going to pay a penny and I'm going to drive an hour before or an hour after and avoid that congested time. And that will allow more people to actually go during congested times because the road will never get congested and you'll have higher capacity.
All right, I think we have time for one more question if it doesn't involve a long answer. Yes?
I'd like to ask Mr. McMahon, what do you have any statistics on what regulations cost the business community and private citizens, either one or both?
There have been various studies on that. We haven't been able to incorporate them, at least to this point, into the indexes because we haven't found, we're looking for it, and they may be out there. There's some interesting work in the United States, but we haven't been able to find one that we can use for Canada, the United States.
and Mexico. What we may do is, if there's data just for the United States, use that in the subnational index and leave it out of the index for the three countries. I won't go on about this, but the worst type of regulation globally, and I suspect Mr. Graham might even be able to comment on that for the United States, are labor market regulations. Here it's the licensing and so on that keeps a lot of people out. But globally, it is one of the greatest poverty producers going.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending this session. I think you've heard a variety of different ways that government can act to basically increase misery, to decrease prosperity and increase poverty. I think some of the things that you heard today were perhaps things that you hadn't considered, things that may not have come naturally to you. For example, Randy O'Toole's presentation on transportation and how wholly inadequate buses are to the task. And then you heard from Alan Graham that it takes, what, 3.5 hours to get a bus to go out the 7.5 miles out to the development that you've created out just east of here. So there are a number of government policies that certainly may have had noble intentions, certainly may have been enacted for health and safety excuses, but for the most part, a lot of these rules and regulations are enacted at the urging of players that have an economic interest, that want to curtail competition, prevent new entrants into a field. Just look, for example, at the struggle we see here in Austin and other cities over Uber and Lyft and competing with the existing taxi cartels, as an example, and all of the lobbying effort being used to shut down this new technological competing entrant into the marketplace. So these are things I think that are things that we ought to all urgently consider as we look at public policy and how the law of unintended consequences can actually make lives less productive and more impoverished. And so again, thank you for showing up to this afternoon's session, and we're delighted that you're here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation's 14th annual policy orientation.
The one thing that